Welcome to episode 1. I'm Max Grazier. Welcome to my new video series, mixing with stock plugins for beginners or people looking to get into mixing. This is going to be episode 1 of 10, outlining how to mix with stock plugins and how you can incorporate different techniques to get a lot out of what you have. And a lot of the videos I've seen that talk about this topic all take place in multi-million-dollar studios or just regular, studios that have nice gear. I'm going to try to do this with as low of a budget as I can, so this is a secondary setup, this is not like where I actually mix. So we're going to talk about what you can and can't do based off of a given setup, and I'm going to try to limit myself with some limitations and kind of show you that you can kind of do it with minimal stuff. All right, here we go. So in this video, we're going to talk about speaker position, where you can sit in a room, and what you can do if you can't change where you sit. We're also going to talk about headphone mixing versus speaker mixing. We're going to talk about how loud you should listen when you're listening to tracks. And we're also going to dive into Pro Tools on the computer, and I'm going to show you how I set up a session, some track organization. We're going to talk about phase and templates and why they're important. We'll end off the video with some key commands. Sit back and here we go. All right, so let's talk about speaker position. I have a pair of PreSonus Iris E3.5s, and these are relatively cheap. I believe they're in the $100 to $150 range for a pair, which is remarkable for good sounding studio monitors. Again, try and keep this low budget. I also have sitting here a PreSonus Fire Studio Project from way back in the day. I think I've had this for close to 8 years now, maybe 9. This thing has been a workhorse for me. These are what I would call fun to listen on speakers, which is not a great term when you get into the realm of speakers. By fun to listen to, I mean that it's hard to hear certain frequencies and cut out certain things. That being said, they're okay for this. Personally, I think they're great for beginner mixers. As to how they're set up, right now, I'm doing what you should not do if you can. I'm in a corner, which is not great. And since I'm in a corner, if you have a little bit of an acoustics background, you know that bass and low end builds up on walls and especially in corners. So this speaker is going to project more low end at me than this one. Symmetry is great in a room, but also not great sometimes. If you're in a square room, for example, reflections will bounce off and you run the risk of running into standing waves, which is not great. So you run into nodes, which are those points in the room where you can't hear a certain frequency, and antinodes, where you hear that frequency doubled, which both are bad. You don't want to be sitting in a spot that's a node or an antinode. And if you're sitting in a node and let's say the node's 500 hertz, and all of a sudden you're losing kind of the mid-range of your guitar a little bit, and you're like, well, I could boost that a little bit, but you go into another room and listen and it's way too much. You don't want that. So if you can, avoid sitting in a node, and there are calculators online that you measure out your room, they'll pinpoint spots where there might be nodes. That being said, this speaker I'm actually pushing back a little bit compared to this because I'm in a corner, which I don't like doing as much, but just to create a center stereo image. And I'll try to get some diagrams up if I can. Since we're in a spot in the room that's not great, we can't change our spot. Something that I like doing when I'm not in a room that I'm personally comfortable with 100% is headphone mixing. And let's talk about headphones for a second. These are Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs, and these are fantastic. Personally, I like them the best of headphones that I've tried, and the reason is because they are high-end heavy, and I find that really important when listening with headphones. And the reason is, when you're listening to headphones, bass frequencies, bass waveforms are huge. They're ginormous. Sometimes they're the size of buildings. And that can get projected. You can hear that in a room through a speaker. And obviously, the bigger the speaker, the more low end. The bigger the woofer, you're gonna get more low end. When you're listening through headphone drivers, you are not hearing those actual fundamentals of the bass, because no way is a waveform that's, I don't know, the size of this room going from the headphone driver to your ear and recreating that big. No way, that's not happening. You're hearing other pitches in the harmonic series that trigger your brain into thinking that you're hearing the fundamental, and your brain thinks that you're hearing bass. The great thing about headphones is you can mix wherever, and honestly, the only variable is how quiet the room you are that you're mixing in. These are going to sound the same always, which is important to note. And especially if you're in a room that's not heavily isolated like the room we're in right now. It's got a lot of windows to the outside. You can hear a lot of outside noise. It's not perfectly dead silent. The room is not acoustically treated to my liking. Headphones are going to come into play, and it's important to have a pair that you trust. And these don't cost too much, especially I'd consider these high-end headphones, and compared to high-end studio monitors, these are a hell of a lot cheaper. Pretty much everywhere that I've seen lists 80 dBFS, which is decibels full scale, as your listening volume when you're listening to music. That's a healthy listening volume. Personally, when I'm mixing, especially if I'm doing a headphone to monitor combo, I like listening relatively soft. And the reason why is if you can't hear your mix across the board at a low volume, if it doesn't translate the same, you have your mix wrong. If you're hearing too much kick or too much snare and not enough vocal, then you need to bring up the vocal and turn down the kick and snare. And then when you bring it up, everything will sit into place. If you're listening too loud, you'll start hearing things that are going to screw with balance. And if you can, mix at a softer volume. Very important. Before we go into Pro Tools, I do want to talk about one more thing, which is hard drive. And it's important that you have a hard drive. Have 2, have 3. I think I have 5 right now, and I just got burned recently for not backing up a project in time and had to start over. And it's really important that you have backups of your work and keep up to date with your backups. I have another drive plugged in that has the session we're going to be working on, but I will be backing up that session to this hard drive after each video that we do. All right, we're going to transfer over to the computer, and I'm going to talk to you from my laptop. Cool. So as I was editing the video, I came to the realization that I have way too much content for just one episode, so we're splitting episode 1 into 5 parts. This was part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. We'll be in Pro Tools. Be sure to subscribe down below and follow me on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff to stay updated with the series.